I'm interviewing today for the Port Townsend Film Festival Sebastian Mendes, the grandson of Aristides de Mendes, a hero, a true hero from the Holocaust era, and he was shown to be the hero that he is in the film Disobedience. Welcome, Sebastian.
Thank you so very much for having me here. It's really an honor, and I'm very pleased to be able to try to spread information and knowledge of the legacy of my grandfather.
Well, the first just real gem in just our little bit of conversation prior to this interview that you told me was that your grandfather was the first. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's right. Well, it was June of 1940. My grandfather was the Portuguese consul in Bordeaux, France, and so I just read today that there were something like 10 million people, refugees, flooding from the north of Europe and the east of Europe into France, trying to get out of France to escape the Nazi invasion. And so in June of 1940, my grandfather was there in a position to be able to give assistance, which we can talk more about in detail, but essentially there had been no major, or I don't think, well, there must have been minor rescue acts of individuals who had humanitarian feelings for the refugees, but the first really large recognized rescue act, and it's so recognized by Yad Vashem, was that of my grandfather, where he spent about 9 days or something like that for the most concentrated period of his rescue actions with the assistance of one son, one nephew, Rabbi Kruger, and then the consular staff.
Yes, and the scope of that was just mind-blowing. And for those who don't know, who are watching this interview, Yad Vashem is the Holocaust Memorial in Israel where he's been honored. And I understand he's about to get a posthumous medal in Portugal.
I don't know about that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know much information about that, but I Googled.
Yeah.
So Google never lies, you know.
Interesting, yeah.
But in any case, what I really want to talk to you about individually as a person growing up in that family, when did you first hear, because you didn't get to know your grandfather personally.
No.
You were 6 years old when he died in the 50s. And, but it sounds to me like your childhood was filled with the story. And when did you first hear it? How did it first come to you?
You're right. My childhood really was permeated with this very special oral history, and I can't say for sure, but I imagine that my father probably was already telling me, even perhaps before I really could, before I had the full use of the English language as a very young boy, 4 or 5, and for sure when I was 5 in kindergarten, I can remember him telling me stories, and it was pretty much a routine part of family life were these discussions and things. And because my father had 14 brothers and sisters, of whom quite a few of them visited or lived in the United States, and so we were frequently visited by those people, and my father did have a few friends who were actually visa recipients, so they would come and the discussions would eventually from time to time cover those days in 1940.
You know, the film focused on one son. Of course, you can't focus on 14 children.
Yeah. Pedro Nuno.
Was that your father or an uncle?
No, that was my father's closest brother, Pedro Nuno. My father was number 10, and Pedro Nuno was number 8, and I think from what my father told me, he had the closest relationship with him, and personally, I also felt the closest relationship with my uncle Pedro Nuno.
And how did this film come into being? How were the seeds laid and germinated?
Well, I probably really can't give you an exact answer to that. I should explain that my connection with Disobedience, the French name for the film, is that I am founding vice president of the Sebastian Mendes Foundation in the United States, which is based in Seattle with board members all over the country. And in 2010, I was part of a group of individuals who made what we call a voyage de souvenir, where we made a kind of pilgrimage following the route of the refugees and everything. And when we were in Paris, we met Bernard Lecoq, the leading actor. We met, now I'm forgetting the director's name, but he was the, he produced the film. We met him. We saw the film for the very first time in 2010, in June of 2010. And after we came from France back to the United States, we were all so moved. We were family members and visa recipients or descendants of visa recipients. And so this was a life-changing experience for us. And we came back to the United States and really just felt so profoundly changed by the experience that we had shared. And we decided that we wanted to do something. And one of the first things was start a foundation and then get the distribution rights to that film. The film is about 5 years old, but I wish I could remember the director's name, but anyway, how he was seized with the vision and the desire and motivation to make that film, I'm not sure exactly.
Well, I do want to say as a film viewer, and Bernard Lecoq,
Yeah.
Anyway, was the lead actor. He did your grandfather proud. I was so drawn to that man by his gentle toughness. It was so well played that it didn't feel like it was being played.
Exactly.
It felt like he was Aristides.
I think he was able to evoke or invoke the intelligence of my grandfather.
And the passion and the caring.
Yeah.
And the courage. The courage.
All of those things.
I mean, intelligence, hey, a lot of people have intelligence, but...
Yeah, well, it was a combination. It was really a kind of synergy.
Yeah.
That, as you say, lots of people may have one or two of the kind of attributes that my grandfather had, but very fortunately, he had several of them. And one of the things I sort of think that he came from an aristocratic family. He was raised in a family of great privilege and comfort. And so the material world, I don't think was so important to him. He was a spiritual man. He was an intellectual man. He was I was told by the president of Queen's University, where he and his twin brother graduated, that by the records, he was one of the best students the university had had, and it's an 800-year-old university. So his intelligence was an important thing, but his coming from a world where you didn't worry about the material things, and just meaning that I think he didn't care. Those things were in his mind nothing to worry about risking. Of course, he loved his family and he knew there was a risk for his family, but so far as I know, my father said that he and his brothers and sisters, although they were very worried, they supported him in what he was doing.
But I don't think, respectfully, I'll say, I don't think he was that casual about possibly losing everything. Yet he did come from great material wealth, but he did know it was at risk, and it wasn't. And he got stripped of everything at one point.
But he was willing to give it up. I guess
And
that's
that's
what
the
I
point.
mean. Yeah, and that's the difference, I think, between. And when I say he had a noble mind, I don't mean because he was nobility, but as we working class people can have a noble mind, and that he did have that sense of nobility for humanity, and that I think was such an important thing that enabled him, amongst his other attributes, to be able to decide to go ahead and do that.
We have about 5 minutes left, so I would like to ask you, is there anything I haven't asked you that you think it would be important for a viewer of our little interview to know?
Well, maybe it goes beyond the immediacy of the actual events and his story, but it's and I mentioned it last night when I was speaking to the audience. There has been a kind of, in Europe, Europeans are aware that there is a resurgence of Holocaust denialism,
Yes.
racism, and the extreme right is threatening. And I think that my grandfather's story, even under the purview of certain scholars who apparently are very conservative, and there's a an English scholar who wrote a book about not about my grandfather, but a large portion of it was written about my grandfather. And in that book, he, in subtle ways, discredits his actions and his motives, saying that he wanted to make money, he wanted to profit from it, and that the actual numbers of those rescued were significantly less than 30,000, when there really is no hard evidence of more or less refugees. But I think the interesting question is in the context of the fact that there is this increase in Holocaust denialism and racism, that his book is coming out now, that somebody published it, and he's not the only one, that there seems to be this tendency that I think we have to be mindful and vigilant and look to his great example.
There's two things that leads me to say in wrapping up. One is that I was very moved by the fact that he would not take a nickel from anybody that he saved, and he was in bad straits at one point, and he would not let anybody take care of him that he had taken care of. I mean, he really was stoic in that sense, and generous, and he wanted what he did to be pure. The other thing I'll say is that I'm with you, that people need to be aware of the resurgence of neo-Nazi activity. When I was in Copenhagen a few years ago, Nazis are not allowed to march in Germany, so they marched in Copenhagen. There was a day that there was a Nazi parade, and I just got out of town. I saw it from my hotel window, and I fled. And in the United States, make no mistakes, there are neo-Nazi groups. So that having this film at this time and helping tap into anybody who is aware of any activity, we all need to be the heroes that your grandfather was.
Well, thank you for saying that. And maybe the last thing I would say is the Sosa Mendes Foundation. SosaMendesFoundation.org is a website where anybody who sees this interview or hears it should visit, because we have exciting programs to kind of continue the legacy of my grandfather's actions, and we work with other foundations as well.
And it's in Seattle. So
That's
people here
right.
in Port Townsend, their neighbors, thank you so much,
Thank
Sebastian
you.
Mendes.
It was a great pleasure.